welcome back to the Political Beat. I'm Pat, this is Chip. We cover City Hall for the London Free Press and LFpress.com here in London, Ontario, where we are not politically correct, we're just correct. And Chip, we have a lot of things to talk about today. Let's start with the Beckler brouhaha, as friend of the show Nathan Smith called it. Explain to me, I was off that day, to your everlasting joy. Explain to me what that meant.
I was thrilled you were off that day, and I actually witnessed it firsthand. The day started with Councillor Joni Beckler being interviewed on CJBK radio in the morning, and she was asked point blank if she thought council and the mayor deserved a raise. They're looking at 1%. She said no. She said there's several members of council that do their work and are doing a fine job, and I think she named 5 of them. In fact, she said, no, they don't deserve a raise. Overall, people aren't doing enough of the work, reading the reports, that sort of thing. They're ill-prepared. Later in the day at the committee meeting of the Corporate Services Committee, I believe it was, Mayor Fontana started the discussion saying he had wakened up in a good mood that day, but when he heard Councillor Beckler on the radio, it ruined it.
I find that absolutely outrageous. I'm going to ask Councillor Beckler, if not tonight, before the planning committee, before the next city council meeting, to do the right thing, and that is to apologize.
He said she was demeaning the team, she would made disparaging remarks about members of council, and that she owed an apology to members of council. Harold Usher, who hadn't even heard the thing on the radio, took umbrage about it, and he also demanded an apology, which I thought was very interesting. He hadn't even heard the remarks.
I take exception to that if that was said or implied, because I do read my agenda. I do come to meetings prepared, and I do a lot more work than just that.
Joni Beckler, I guess, gets wind of this through the Twitterverse and comes down to council and attempts to respond to the criticisms of her.
Mid-debate. She shows up mid-debate.
She shows up before the committee meeting is over, and she asks, at the tail end of it, she asks for an opportunity to speak. Mayor Fontana wouldn't recognize her. When she said, listen, you've been talking about me, I want to set the record straight.
I wasn't here to even speak to what it was that the mayor is demanding an apology, so you're suggesting that I simply don't have a voice at the committee, that the mayor does, but I don't.
He's trying to shut her down. 3 members of the committee walked out. Quorum was gone. Fontana says, I can't give you a platform here, and goodbye. And that's where it ended. And afterwards, Councillor Beckler said she felt muzzled.
I think the question was, do you think members of council deserve a raise? I said, certainly there's a lot of members of council that work very hard. And I said, certainly Paul Hubert, Matt Brown, Judy Bryant, Nancy Branscombe. I could have said Harold Usher. I could have said others, but at the time, you know, I didn't think of Harold, and so that was the extent of my conversation. I know he directly asked me if I thought the mayor should deserve a raise, and I said no.
She's criticized in her absence, doesn't get a chance to set the record straight, wasn't impressed with the mayor, and I think it's going to come up to council on Tuesday night as a point of personal privilege, I think they call it, and it's all part of the code of conduct. And anyway, it's yet another ring-dang-do at council.
Yeah, and it's like there's no big deal here, but it is a pretty good little dust-up, and emphasis on little, but it's interesting enough. And I think this notion that, hey, you're part of a team, you're on city council, you can't criticize other people on the team, that's a real false premise for the mayor to go on. I don't have a problem with a politician going on in the press and saying, I prefer if they do it with us rather than Steve Garrison, but anyway, to go into the press and say, I don't think we deserve a raise, I don't think people do their work. I will quibble with Beckler. She said that some of us work hard, including Nancy Branscombe, who definitely works hard when she bothers to show up to the meetings, but other than that, I think I'd have no problem with what Beckler said.
No, and she's entitled to express an opinion. It's a matter of public debate. It's a public issue. Council has to decide on it. She's entitled to her opinion and entitled to express it.
But then again, I don't have a problem with the mayor calling her out about it either. What's good for the goose is, what's that expression?
She
what's good for the
didn't
goose
demean or disparage anyone. She talked about some people she thought were stellar in terms of their work. She didn't say, so-and-so Fontana doesn't do it, or Harold Usher doesn't do his job, or any of this sort of stuff. She was simply threw in a couple of names. Maybe the wisdom of that wasn't the greatest. However, she wasn't disparaging or demeaning anyone, quite frankly.
Right, I don't have a problem with it either way. I don't have a problem with what she did, I don't have a problem with what the mayor did.
Well, the mayor should be above all this sort of stuff. He's been in public office for more than 20 years. One would have thought he'd have a thick skin by now, but I guess not.
Joe's got a pretty thick skin, Chip.
Why didn't he let this pass?
I don't know. He was in a bad mood. So I don't have a problem with it either way. But it's an interesting thing, and it'll be something fun to watch That's a funny word, fun. But it will be kind of fun
You
to
know,
watch
Pat,
that
if it
council.
weren't for wrong opinions, you wouldn't have any.
I'd agree with you, but then we'd both be wrong.
Then
That's what my dad used to say. Let's talk about the councillor from Ward 2, Bill Armstrong. This is an
Please,
interesting
this
thing.
is very interesting.
So you've got community groups across the city. There would be dozens of community groups. You'd be talking about things like this one, like there's an Old South Communities
Association,
organization.
Argyle,
and this is the
Masonville,
Argyle. Yeah,
West
they're all over
London,
the
they're
place.
all over the place.
And these are, generally speaking, God bless you if you volunteer for these, to be a part of these groups, because they actually keep City Hall honest. They're the community's voice to the ward councillor,
That's right.
to the full council often.
Sometimes it's a breeding ground for political
and it can be
careers, too.
for political careers.
Yeah.
Let's look at, there's people on the Urban League board that are running for council now. Urban League is the citywide umbrella group of all these organizations. A woman named Nancy McSloy is running in Ward 2 against her former friend, Bill Armstrong. She is on the Argyle Community Association board. Councillor Bill Armstrong went to the head of that board and said, this is an unfair advantage. Nancy McSloy has an unfair advantage on me by being a member of this community association and running against me. She should be off the board. The Argyle Community Association board decided last night. I was there. Sorry, Councillor Armstrong, not a chance. Nancy has every intention, again, this woman's name is Nancy McSloy. She has every intention of not being involved in the process when the Argyle Community Association does things like organizing all candidates debates. I think you have every right to run for council. If you want to be on a community association board, you should damn well be on the community association board. Councillor Armstrong has no right to stick his face in there and say she shouldn't be. I think this is a real, I would say, abuse of power. It has not worked. She's not leaving the board. I don't like this one bit.
I agree with you 100%, but Councillor Armstrong, when he's awake, does tend to poke his nose into things that are iffy.
Well,
I'm thinking of a pharmacy.
And this is the latest example of it, and I have no doubt that he'll call our editor about my story, which is what he often does. He won't call me to discuss his concerns with it, but I will say this. He's been on council for 20 years, so you can stick around that long. You got a lot on the ball.
You should have a thick skin.
Okay, but if you've got a 20-year name recognition and you're worried about one of your opponents being on a community association board, as effective and as good as that community association is, and it is very effective in the Argyle community, which is in the East End, it's actually a fairly vibrant commercial node if you haven't been there, and there's about 1,200 members in the Argyle Community Association, and some of those people really know what they're doing and they really care about their community. And I'll be frank with you, Nancy McSloy's relationship with Bill Armstrong, not very good, not good at all, for a variety of factors, but I don't know why he did this, and now we got to write the story about it now, and it's not going to look good, and I just kind of wish that it hadn't happened, but it did, and I see it as an attempt to push somebody around and tweak somebody that's running against you on council.
Again, it's all the nonsense that's happening as we lead up to an election, and I think it ties in nicely with the mayor speaking up on behalf of himself and council against Beckler, and now Armstrong's worried about that. We have an election. It's almost exactly 7 months to the day until an election. People are hyper sensitive, and I think that just falls into it. And after 20 years in politics with Fontana, 20 years in politics with Armstrong, honestly, guys, please, thicken up the skin.
And Bill's going to win anyway.
Who knows?
Well, I know. He's going to win anyway, I think.
Well, incumbency has shown if you are an incumbent, you have an obvious advantage, and most incumbents that want to run again are re-elected.
Right, and Bill's got two strong candidates running against him. So they split the sort of, hey, we want a new guy vote. He gets the, hey, we like the old guy vote.
Yep.
Anyway, whatever. That's just my opinion. Speaking of hypersensitive, pay raise. Councillors have City Hall has a sort of like a rule in place. Every year, councillors automatically get a 1% pay raise. Your average councillor makes about, we'll say roughly $35,000 a year, which is, for a part-time job, it's not a lot of money when the average salary is, in the country, is $48,000 or something. So, and then the mayor would be about $130,000. But anyway, I digress. 1% raise every year, but they still have to rubber stamp it. Council has to rubber stamp it. And that gets a little tricky when it's an election year. It's afoot now. Corporate Services Committee endorsed it by a 3-2 vote.
3-2
goes to
vote.
Full council next week. What do you think's going to happen?
I was shocked that it was passed, quite frankly, The outside workers have accepted a pay freeze for the first 2 years in their new contract. There's a little cash, $500 I think in the one year, $600 in the other, but it's a freeze. It doesn't raise the grid. Quite frankly, they were praised for showing some leadership and responding to concerns about London taxpayers.
Workers,
the unionized workers. And here we are. We have a council that's
and City Hall is putting the heat on firefighters to take a modest pact.
Exactly. Yep. So here you are. I cannot understand why they are going with a 1% or would consider a 1% pay increase at this point. Granted, there have been 2 years in the past they accepted freezes. Provincial parliamentarians, members of the legislature, have had their pay frozen since 2008 or 9 and will be frozen until 2016 in order to show some leadership on the issue about restraint. And I'm disappointed, quite frankly, that council is, or at least the committee has said yes. At council, to answer your question, I think it's going to be in for a rough ride, and I hope it is.
You know what I think? If you're going to take all the slings and arrows to vote for a 1% pay raise, make it a 5% pay raise.
Oh, exactly.
Give yourself some extra money.
Sure.
Like 1%, you're not even going to notice it.
That's right.
So if you're in for a penny, you're in for a pound. You can take all this heat.
There was a member of council.
There
was a member of council many years ago, Paul York, who was wonderful and very colorful, and he said, if you're having trouble borrowing $100,000 from the bank, ask for $1 million. It's easier to get.
Really?
Yeah.
What was the
because
rationale
the bankers' eyes light up and say, oh, we can make some real money here. So that's the same
interesting.
thing. Why go in for a penny? Let's go for a pound.
Yeah, I don't know.
5% pay increase.
They're not giving themselves. They're not going to get it. I think 980 had a story. They've talked to 8 of the 15 who said I won't support it. So
yeah, I think it's in for a rough ride.
And it's just like, it's so awkward. You got to publicly vote for your own pay raise in an election year when there's all the other stuff going on around it. Well, brutal. Yep. Matt Brown, who's always been opposed to that process of council voting for their own pay raise, he launches his mayoral campaign. I mean, he's already entered, but he launches it formally on Thursday, April 3rd. So like a big splashy event planned. Matt's got he's mounting a very serious campaign. I don't think we've seen a candidate like this in probably close to 15, 20 years in London. A sitting councillor presumably challenging a mayor seeking re-election. What is Matt's biggest challenge, do you think, going into I think I know the answer, but what do you think is...
We need to know who Matt Brown is, bottom line. Right. We need to know who he is. He has been very low-key, very uncontroversial, very sort of like wallpaper to some degree so far in this term, his first term. We need to know more about him, and I think that's he's got to get out there.
Would you agree he's a good councillor?
I think so. I wish I had some anecdotes to say yes or no. I believe he's doing a fine job. He's very measured. He seems to do the homework. He does seem to work a lot in the community with community organizations and showing up at appropriate places.
Here's a story I heard that you got the police. They come in and they sought a 4.2% budget increase in 2014, right? And the mayor and a few other councillors said, forget it. You're getting zero. No, we need 4.2%. You're getting zero. Well, I was told that Matt went to the police and said, I know you're asking very quietly, away from everybody. I know you're asking for 4.2%. What can you live with, right? And they were able to broker a compromise quietly behind the scenes. And the police did take less than they wanted originally. And there was a compromise there. And they credit him with helping to bridge that gap. There's a guy who really understands those big issues like budgeting, planning, but most people don't understand that. So when that's your strength, that's hard to translate that into...
He also did some compromise work with respect to that Penn Equity project in the South End, the commercial. There were sort of two sides. We have a mayor who's a bit of a street fighter and likes to duke it out and fight. I think the big difference with Matt Brown is he's a compromiser. He seeks compromise and tries to bring people together. And I think that's a completely different style, but certainly low-key. It's not an explosion in a public forum.
He's a very deliberate guy.
He's very deliberate.
And assuming Joe does run, and Joe has not entered the race yet. He says he's going to, but assuming he does run, I think that the two different styles are so dramatically distinct. I think it's a fascinating thing. It's really fascinating.
It is two completely different candidates.
And did we have anything else to talk about? I think we got everything.
That's bored people quite enough, don't you think, Morris?
Yeah, I think we're done. So on behalf of Chip, I'm Pat. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time at lfpress.com.